Origin's reaction. This is how geography is pushing India and China to war, part 2, I guess. I did the first portion of this, I guess, a few weeks ago, a month ago, I don't remember exactly. I forgot that I haven't finished this. And then I realized I didn't. Yeah. Real life lore videos are so long, 50 minutes, and like my reactions are usually like double the length. So it's like 20-minute video usually turns to 40-minute. So 50-minute video would be like 1.5 hour long reaction. So I usually do it in parts, and then I don't know, sometimes I just don't do it. But then I realized like this is lazy shit. And I'm like, now I have to do it, right? So past few videos, like I finished it, and like every new video I try to finish it. I'm pretty sure there are a few real life lore videos that I haven't still finished, like really old. I have to check that one. I don't know. But yeah, this is like, I'm an Indian. This is about India and China. So it's like, this is the one I have to finish. So yeah, India and China, judging from the comments, one thing is apparent to me that in America and like Western countries, when it comes to India and China, people don't know much about it, about the conflict for whatever reason. And only thing I can think of that because American Western countries rely on China a lot, and now India as well for a lot of production and things like that, they don't want to get into middle of them, because offending any of them might be like, let's just say, problem to the profits at best, right? So something like that, they don't want to get into it, so they just avoid it. But India and China thing has been intensifying for past like 8-10 years. China and skirmishes happening a lot. Some kind of a rule is there, so the people can't fight with the weapons, so they have this like melee weapons, fist fights and things like that. You see that a lot in Himalayas and things like that. China point blank just like creating, this is, by the way, Arunachal Pradesh is really our state, because of like how the first person told us like how it happened, right? What is the history behind that? Obviously British were involved, so there you go. British didn't care to ask China for like, do you agree with this or not, and just like move forward. At the time, China wasn't that powerful compared to the British Empire, so there's many shit happen in the background that like now China suddenly like Arunachal Pradesh is ours, even though since the 1947 1950s it's been part of the India. But there you go. So it's going to be interesting. This Arunachal Pradesh thing might be one of those things that might turn India and China war inevitable, like how Taiwan makes US and China conflict somewhat inevitable, something like that. Who knows? But that's terrifying. India and China is like big enough, powers to be a problem. China is really big enough, right? Second biggest power alongside US, I guess. India is in top 5, soon is going to grow. So that's a problem with the population and everything, right? Both are like 1.4, 1.2, something like that, billion people. So even by conscription, like numbers could be like staggering. It would like put World War II death to shame, the numbers to shame, if India and China proper war starts. That's just fucked up when you think about it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Let's do it. Remember, you'll flag my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. You can really help out the channel by, just like any engagement, like, comment or whatever, subscribing if you haven't subscribed. Because I watch many different type of videos. Like, I don't know. I don't have really set up to things. I just watch whatever I want to watch. And YouTube usually doesn't like that. So, how many percentage of people click on my video, that hasn't changed. But sometimes views drastically drop because YouTube just doesn't send enough people the recommendation, impression, things like that, because YouTube suddenly realized like, wait a minute, now I'm not watching history video, I'm watching military videos. Now I'm watching video game videos. So just like YouTube gets confused about that. So yeah, let's watch this one.
In the Trans-Karakoram Tract because of their proximity to the Siachen Glacier, and India's road that connects the remote area around the glacier back to the rest of Indian-controlled territory. The Siachen Glacier is located within territory currently controlled by India, but it's located immediately across the separate line of actual control that India also shares with Pakistan, their arch geopolitical rival, who also claims the territory of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah, China
Pakistan
light.
accepted China's territorial claims in the region of access Aksai Chin in the Trans-Karakoram Tract in order to secure Beijing's support for the rest of their claims to the territory in Jammu and Kashmir, currently under Indian control, that's also home to more than 12.5 million people. India is therefore primarily concerned about China's control over Aksai Chin because, in the event of a conflict, the PLA would not have to advance very far from Aksai Chin in order to seize control over the Indian road that leads to the Siachen Glacier opposite of the Pakistani armed forces, which would then enable Pakistan to move in and seize control over the glacier without stable Indian reinforcements or logistics. Between 1984 and 2003, Pakistan and India fought bitterly over the control of this glacier, in which an estimated 2,000 soldiers were killed, which earned the Siachen Glacier the moniker of being the highest battlefield in the world. And the concern here around the Siachen Glacier and Aksai Chin is only a small part of India's greater...
Okay, I remember watching Top Gear episode, one of the best episode there is. I'm pretty sure like they went from like African jungle to like a mountain to, right? Or was it South America? I don't exactly remember. Something like that. It's one of the best special episode there is. I love it, right? I haven't watched Top Gear in like long enough time now that I'm really having trouble with the memory, but yeah, it's one of the best episode. In there, like Clarkson says, like you have to take something like Viagra or something just because you're that high at elevation. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, it helps you with like a heart rate and things like that. Is that what it is? So people basically in this type of conflict, like Himalayas, highest conflicts that are, people do that shit, something, something like that. Does military give out something like that? Because I don't know, it's always surprised me. Like, I'm a very scientific guy, so whenever I see something like this, like how our bodies work at different elevations, different conditions, it's really surprising.
Fear of the overall extremely close relationship that has emerged between Pakistan and China. Both countries maintain large territorial claims to lands that India currently controls. Pakistan claims 110,000 square kilometers of land that India controls, not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but also in the formerly princely state of Junagadh, that Pakistan also claims within India's modern state of...
What the fuck? Pakistan claims Junagadh? How does that work? What? How is that claimed by Pakistan? Junagadh. I know Junagadh. I've been to Junagadh many times. I've seen not a single people there even can be identified even close to like Pakistan, right? If you ask them, well, how would you feel if you were like suddenly part of Pakistan? They'd probably leave the place, like empty the place or something. Those are like proper Indians, right? How does that a conflict thing like Jammu Kashmir at least makes sense? How is Junagadh all the way here?
Gujarat. Combined with China's claims to Indian-controlled territories like Arunachal Pradesh, Pakistan and China collectively claim nearly 200,000 square kilometers of Indian-administered territory, a huge area that's roughly the size of Washington state in the United States. India's ultimate nightmare scenario is being one day forced into fighting a two-front war against Pakistan and China at the same time, both of whom are armed with nuclear weapons. While India is even further growing increasingly concerned that China is starting to encircle them from an economic point of view. Since China unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative in 2020...
Economical, every sense. China has like a base at Sri Lanka, which is like literally south of India, touching India. You can see India from there, which is like kind of fucked up.
6 out of India's 7 immediate neighbors have signed up to become a part of the initiative. Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and the Maldives. Only Bhutan, India's closest ally in the region, has joined New Delhi in resisting the lure of joining the Belt and Road Initiative, which has led New Delhi into feeling that it has been losing significant clout in its own backyard to Beijing, that could reduce regional support for India in the event of...
Yeah, like I said, Maldives, which is also like close to India, like southwestern part of like border of India. It's a island, which was always like friendly to India, right? The biggest economical drive for Maldives was Indian tourism. Suddenly, like a newer guy who come in is like you know, like China, pro-China, told Indian troops to like get out of the Maldives and things like that. Even their like economy like took a big hit because Indians stopped going there because of this clear, blatant like China power move. So China has been trying to circle India, literally, physically, not just economically, putting bases and everywhere like pro-China things around India, which is like it's one thing to say like, okay, China and India, like I'm more powerful than India type of way. But this feels like, more methodical, right? This feels like planned thing. Like, okay, we are going to attack India one day, so we are circling them in advance type of shit. That is concerning. That's scary, because India is not a small country in any sense, whether military, economy, or anything, right? Population. This type of shit feels like, what the fuck?
A potential future conflict. The talks of potential Chinese debt traps and hypothetical naval bases in many of these countries like Hyokpu in Myanmar, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and Gwadar in Pakistan has not aided with India's growing feelings of insecurity and Chinese encirclement. Though China has still to date not actually built any naval facilities in any of these locations yet. Meanwhile, from China's perspective, their border dispute with India and Bhutan is truly only a secondary concern of theirs at the moment. Throughout the 2020s, Beijing's primary territorial focus will almost certainly remain on asserting the Chinese Communist Party's control over Taiwan. Whereas India's ultimate nightmare scenario is a two-front war against Pakistan and China, China's ultimate nightmare scenario is having to fight their own two-front war against the United States and her allies in the Pacific during an assault on Taiwan.
Yeah, there is no way in blue hell, if China attacks Taiwan, India doesn't get into that action somehow from Taiwan side. Because it's not about like potential war against China in the future. It is happening now. China is literally attacking Indian border constantly 24/7. So even as we speak, something's happening, right? In the northern Himalayan borders, right? They even point blank now claimed Arunachal Pradesh. India will find an excuse, right? If the Taiwan thing does happen, India will be there.
And against India across the Himalayas region. A major war with India over the disputed land border is not within China's best interests, while its focus is fixated east on Taiwan. And so, Beijing would like to keep things on the line of actual control as quiet as possible for now. China is overall considered to be relatively happy with the status quo on the border they've maintained since their military victory over India in 1962, but they remain incentivized to deter any and all perceived Indian threats to challenging it, and increasing their leverage whenever they sense the opportunity to do so. However, because of India's continuous claims on Aksai Chin and other locations along the line of actual control, and India's consistent refusal to ever consider recognizing China's claim to Aksai Chin, in exchange for Beijing's recognition of India's claim to Arunachal Pradesh, China has likely calculated that settling the border dispute with India once and for all to permanently stabilize the border and prevent the odds of a two-front war would necessarily require China to make territorial concessions to India, like giving up on Arunachal Pradesh or South Tibet forever and retreating from Aksai Chin, the Trans-Karakoram Tract, and the other smaller territories. And Beijing is likely reason that from its newfound position of strength and power in the 21st century, they have no further need to make any compromises on territory. Moreover, even if Beijing were to make a significant territorial compromise with India to settle the border dispute,
no way in hell China ever concede to anything. That's not happening in today's world, right? There will be never position unless some kind of conflict happens and both parties realize okay, we have to come to the table type of shit. China is not doing that in advance. No way. Especially the aggressiveness China is showing. China is not the one that's gonna okay, let's just make a deal here. That's not gonna happen.
It would carry with it a precedent for China's other ongoing and more serious territorial disputes in places like the South China Sea, which could harden the resolve of countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia to simply decide on waiting the Chinese claims out and pushing back more firmly against them. China also maintains old concerns and grievances about India's continued hosting of the 88-year-old Dalai Lama ever since he fled from Tibet in 1959 and its hosting of the influential Tibetan government in exile as well, which lobbies international support for Tibet's greater autonomy within China and sometimes even for Tibet's outright independence again. And there are newer, greater concerns about India that have been growing in China recently since the 2010s too. Namely, India's increasingly close relationship with their own top geopolitical rival, the United States. As China has risen in strength, India has naturally sought a counterweight to increase their own negotiating power. And what better counterweight than the most powerful country in the world? And for Washington, increasingly concerned about great power competition with China in the Indo-Pacific, they have calculated that there is no better country in the region to counter China's rise than India. India now has a larger population base to pull from than China does. Its economy has risen to become the 5th largest in the world and is likely to surpass Japan soon to become the 4th largest. And its defense spending is already increased to become the 4th largest in the world behind only the heavyweights of America, China, and Russia. The Indian Navy is a modern and capable force with 2 aircraft carriers in operation compared to China's 3 carriers, which gives India the ability to project
Two aircraft carrier. Well, Americans like, yeah, that's cute. Yeah, but then again, like, okay, we're relatively new to the technology. Let's just say, like, India's concern is more like ground based than sea based. So yeah, it's fine.
Power across the Indian Ocean region in a way that few other countries can match. Wishing to court India against China since the 2010s then, Washington has invested considerable diplomatic effort into pleasing New Delhi. The United States amended its own domestic laws to allow for the construction of 6 US-designed nuclear power reactors in India in 2016. The United States has publicly backed India's efforts to become a new permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, which China opposes. The United States has exempted India from sanctions that other countries have suffered by purchasing oil from Iran and Russia. And in 2017, after a nearly decade-long hiatus, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States revived the quadrilateral security dialogue.
Okay, I'm an Indian, so I'm not complaining, but how do you explain that, right, to the people you're sanctioning? We're going to let India do their thing, right, which, how it should be, right? India's going to worry about their own people, right? If they can find cheaper things somewhere, they're going to buy it, but that should apply to everybody else. So, like, the message here is, like, we need India, so we're going to let that go, but we don't need you as much, so we're going to put sanctions on you. Like, how do you sell that? But then again, that's the thing with geopolitics. You don't have to sell anything, right? Everybody who's involved in this type of geopolitics knows what is their strength and what is their weaknesses, and just going to accept from their point on, right? Like, we can't do much about it. It is what it is. What are you going to shame America openly or something? Like, okay, you letting India do their thing, but not letting her do it. That's not going to work.
Dialogue, or the Quad, between them. A strategic security dialogue that involves joint military exercises dedicated to countering China's maritime claims in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific, both militarily and diplomatically. India's capable navy and their possession of a series of far-flung islands known as the Andaman and Nicobar Islands make Beijing's military planners particularly anxious. These islands sit strategically close by to the western entrance of the Malacca Strait, a narrow choke point that represents the fastest maritime route available between the Chinese Pacific coast and the rich oil and gas fields around the...
This is where the Sentinel Island is, the one there, what is it, cannibal one? I don't know, whatever, the left behind, not cannibal one. Is it basically the tribe that is left alone or something, right?
Persian Gulf. The Malacca Strait therefore represents China's most critical energy artery, through which an estimated 60% of China's entire oil supply flows through. If the US or allied navies were to blockade the Malacca Strait during a wartime scenario, such as during an attempted Chinese invasion of Taiwan, then 60% of China's oil supply would immediately become eliminated, which would quickly begin to starve their war machine of vital fuel. The US Navy already maintains a base on the eastern edge of the Malacca Strait in Singapore, and if the Indian Navy joined the war, or worse, granted the US Navy the rights to base themselves in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands too, then China would face the dilemma of defending the critical Malacca Strait.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be the latter one. India's not going to give any power like that because it is a power. If you give access now, you give access for a long time or whatever, right? But I think Indian Navy, like I said, probably going to join. Like, if scenario like this happens, like, okay, we got this part, you got that part, there you go.
Hostile naval forces on both of its flanks. Moreover, back along the line of actual control on land, India's open bellicosity towards Pakistan and their competing claims with Pakistan in Jammu and Kashmir is yet another grave concern of Beijing's to have to deal with. Since 2015, China's single largest project of their entire Belt and Road Initiative has been focused in Pakistan and dubbed the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. China's poured more than $65 billion worth of investment into developing this project over the decade since it began, which includes a modern deep-water port at Gwadar on the coast and a well-built road and rail line from the port leading up across Pakistan's territory into China's Xinjiang province. To Beijing, the CPEC has become a cornerstone of their strategy in avoiding their reliance on the Malacca Strait for oil imports coming in from the Persian Gulf. Since, with the CPEC operational, Persian Gulf oil can just be transported to Gwadar and then carried by truck or rail car up through Pakistan and into China directly, which greatly reduces China's vulnerability to an American naval blockade in Malacca. Moreover, the project is also intended to spur on economic development in China's Xinjiang region, which Beijing hopes...
I mean, look, it's like a fail-safe type of thing, but it can't really like make up for like loss of the seaway, right? The level of things you can transport through water is not going to be matched by rail from Pakistan to China's like Xinjiang, province. Not to mention most of the China is like eastern, southeastern side basically. This is the area. This is like mostly empty, so it's like problematic to get the goods here in the first place. So it's like a supplement, like better than nothing type of way. But yeah, the losing the Indian Ocean element is like catastrophic. They're not going to let that happen.
To use to reduce militant influence on Muslim separatists among the native Uyghur people there. But alarmingly for China, the route of the CPEC's roads and railways necessarily runs through the Pakistani-controlled area of Jammu and Kashmir in order to reach China, which is all through territory that is disputed and claimed by India. This whole project has greatly annoyed India, but from Beijing's perspective, if India were to ever act on their territorial claims on the Pakistani-controlled area of Jammu and Kashmir and successfully seize it through force, they would also seize control over the CPEC, destroy China's greatest alternative oil import artery, destroy more than $65 billion worth of Chinese investment, and leave China more exposed to an American naval blockade of Malacca that could literally crash China's oil supply and wreck their military's operating effectiveness during a war. Worse still, China perceives its air force at being at a distinct disadvantage along the line of actual control with India, because the operating altitudes across the Tibetan Plateau to the north of the line are much higher than the altitudes in India to the south of the line, which lengthens the ignition times required of China's jet engines and restricts their aircraft's fuel and payload capacities, which already
India always had advantage there, right?
Will make China's air campaigns in the region more difficult than India's, and doubly so if their oil supply is restricted by Indian and American seizures of their critical.
Not to mention India has like Apache helicopters, like American equipments, which is like superior, let's just say.
Port arteries. And then there is Beijing's own perceived vulnerability of their Chumbi Valley, too. The valley here is narrow and is flanked by higher ground to the west in India's Sikkim state and to the east in Bhutan. With Bhutan a close military and diplomatic ally of India's, Indian artillery emplacements during a wartime scenario on the higher ground all around the Chumbi Valley could render it almost defenseless by initiating a pincer attack on it. And then if the Indians secured control over the valley leads directly through the Himalayas into the Tibetan Plateau, and from there, relatively close by is Lhasa, the religious and legal capital of Tibet, with the Dalai Lama and the
What the hell, voice was down or something? Oh, there we go.
Government in exile, both still hosted by India, China's darkest fear is an Indian military advance breaking through the Chumbi Valley and carrying the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile back to Lhasa again, and encouraging another great Tibetan revolt to erupt again in the process. And so, to better their own geographic positioning around the Chumbi Valley, that is why China has been steadily and quietly invading and settling several strategically chosen territories of Bhutan. China has long maintained a claim to the Doklam Plateau region of Bhutan on the pretense that it is a historic extension of Tibet, but for the geopolitical rationale that it extends Chinese control to encompass the higher ground east of the Chumbi Valley and denies the Indian army the ability to access it instead. But its claims to the other territories in Bhutan are much more recent. China only began staking out claims to these territories in northern Bhutan, called the Baiyul and the Machuma Valley, only in the 1980s, in an apparent attempt to directly target Bhutan's deeply Buddhist culture. The Baiyul area in particular is considered to be highly sacred and culturally significant to the Bhutanese people, where the kingdom's monarchy traces its ancestral origins to. To Bhutan, China's claim and settlement of the Baiyul region would be as if Canada suddenly made a claim to the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island in New York, and began actively colonizing them with armed troops and settlers. For decades now, since 1990, China has attempted to weaponize its claims over the sacred Baiyul region in the Machuma Valley to pressure Bhutan into a deal, by offering to recognize Bhutan's claims in the north if Bhutan only recognized China's claims to the Doklam Plateau in the west. China has noted during negotiations that their claim in the north is 495 square kilometers, while their claim in the west is only 269 square kilometers, implying that Bhutan stands to acquire the larger and more culturally significant territory by.
That is some next level shit. I'm gonna like take hostage of two things. I'm gonna tell you to I'm gonna let go of one of them if you can just have me the other one. In the end, they took a piece of Bhutan. That is some next level shit, right? That is what's happening.
By accepting the deal. But accepting such a deal would immediately jeopardize Bhutan's relationship with its historic protector and ally, India, who would be loath to see China's geographic position in the Doklam Plateau be strategically enhanced so nearby to their own vulnerable Siliguri corridor. India has relentlessly pressured Bhutan into never accepting the deal with China while standing up for Bhutan's complete territorial integrity. But China has also continued building up the pressure on Bhutan to cave into it. In 2020, after decades of failed negotiations, China suddenly began claiming a whole new territory in the east of Bhutan, encompassing the Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary. In an apparent message to Bhutan that if they continue refusing to yield the Doklam Plateau, China will just continue.
Yeah, look, at this point, Bhutan has two options. Either give in to China and take your chances, which is kind of like fucked up, I don't know, or have some military pact with India where Indian troops can be at Bhutan's borders, where China can just claim and like strong arm them. If Indian troops are there, what the fuck China's gonna do? Like go into conflict? Like right now, like, stuck between two stones, this is gonna end badly for Bhutan.
Claiming even more of Bhutan's territory. And in addition to the paper claims on maps, China is solidifying their claims on the ground with a rapid influx of settlers and soldiers since 2020 as well. In only the past 4 years, the Baiyul and Manchuma Valley areas claimed by China in northern Bhutan have seen a rapid pace of Chinese infrastructure development and settlement. Dozens of miles of roads have been paved. Hundreds of houses and other structures capable of supporting hundreds to even thousands of Chinese settlers have been constructed. And even military and police outposts and electricity plants have been—
Oh my god, the more it zooms out, look at that, there's small trucks there, and look at the drop. Oh. And the trucks doesn't look like that. Let's just say these are not Volvos or something, as far as I can see. Right, that's just insane.
Spotted by satellites. China is constructing entire villages within their claimed territories in Bhutan and within the sacred region of the Baiyul, increasing the pressure on Bhutan's government
creating
even
empty
further
cities
to yield in order to regain their own control over the sacred Baiyul in exchange for giving up the Doklam Plateau. Bhutan is effectively being squeezed between the two giants of Asia that surround them as they attempt to outmaneuver one another, and they are becoming presented with an impossible choice to make. They can continue to ignore China's demands and continue watching more of their country's territory get claimed, seized, and colonized by Chinese settlers. Or they can cave to the Chinese pressure and surrender the Doklam Plateau in exchange for Beijing releasing their claims everywhere else, and destroy their long-standing relations with India in the process.
Yeah, see, I think the military pact is the only thing that makes sense. Military pact with India where Indian troops can be in Bhutan or something like that. Because if you give in to China, the Indian relation is gone. India is not gonna like even look favorably towards you. But what if China after that still takes more pieces? Like fuck it, like what you gonna do now? You don't have India to worry about, right? So China can just take what is Bhutan going to do? So giving into China is kind of like strong. Maybe China will leave you alone, maybe not.
Who is their most important ally and by far their most important trade partner, as about 95% of Bhutan's exports go to India and roughly 90% of Bhutan's imports come from India. Were Bhutan to ever surrender the Doklam Plateau to China, India would feel that their final loyal ally in the region would have turned against them, and the sense of paranoia within New Delhi of becoming encircled by Chinese-influenced countries would rise even further, which means that India's willingness to confront China on the border more aggressively would rise as well. Bhutan is a small but strategically located kingdom of fewer than 800,000 people wedged in between two nuclear-armed giants, with more than 1 billion people each. And so they do their best to appease both sides as much as possible in order to avoid a full-blown war from erupting across their territory between them. Bhutan has long maintained diplomatic relations with India ever since India's founding in 1947, and India's guarantee of Bhutan's protection since 1949, while Bhutan has never established formal diplomatic relations with China in any of its forms. Curiously, Bhutan is the only country in the world who's never officially recognized either the mainland-based People's Republic of China nor the Taiwan-based Republic of China, refusing to recognize the PRC in order to appease India, but also refusing to recognize the ROC in order to not infuriate Beijing too greatly. Moreover, Bhutan has also avoided ever establishing diplomatic relations with any of the world's other major powers as well, so as not to antagonize China too greatly. Bhutan is the only UN member state who maintains no diplomatic relations with any of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, including none with the United States. In fact, Bhutan only maintains formal diplomatic relations with 54 of the 193 UN member states, in its deliberate policy of isolationism that strategically aims to balance itself between the giant orbits of India and China. But it ultimately remains difficult to see how this crisis at the roof of the world will ever be solved through diplomacy, as China continues encroaching on Bhutan's territory, expanding their territorial claims even further, building villages and bringing in thousands of settlers. A clash between China and India over the status of Bhutan.
Look, man, claiming a territory and putting your military there to like control it is one thing. Claiming a territory and creating whole villages, like artificial fucking villages, moving people there, telling your people like for the country you're doing this, welcome to communism. And sometimes people comment down like, like that's not, not understanding what communism means. People comment down because of my comments like this, right? Communism is like, people's will comes first, and that translates into like people's nation's will comes first. That's why, like precedent for life type of thing, right? What is best for China, not any individual. That's the whole thing. So, few people can screw themselves if it means like, China as a whole can be better. Like in India and USA or something, right? Obviously there are like laws like eminent domain and things, but let's just say like, some government or something trying to build a road where your property is. You can fight back. There is an option of that. Like, okay, this is my house or something like this is important. You can't just build a road. In China, there is no fighting back. This is good for China. You're coming the way. Get out of here. That type of way. So in communism, good for the country. Just go there, live on those villages, and people have to do this shit. Obviously, this thing's gonna happen like background, not just point blank officially, right? Because you can't just like even in communism, you can't just tell people to leave your houses and like go there. There'll be some incentives there, some more money involved, but essentially there'll be threat of something like, okay, you have to go and live in those villages because good for the country or something.
May eventually be coming, even though all sides involved wish to avoid one. And it's already come very close to happening already. In 2017, Chinese soldiers attempted to construct a road in the disputed Doklam Plateau of Bhutan that would have connected the territory to the Chumbi Valley in Tibet, which would have enabled Chinese troops and equipment to more easily access it. Terrified, the Indian army came in with bulldozers and confronted the Chinese soldiers in Doklam, and initiated a tense 73-day standoff where both armies formed human chains to face each other down before both sides withdrew. Then, 3 years later in 2020, calculating that it needed to display a greater show of force towards India, the Chinese began advancing thousands of soldiers towards different locations in the western section of the line of actual control, which sparked a fierce Indian response and massive clashes along the border. In a previous attempt to de-escalate tensions along the line of actual control, both India and China had agreed back in 1996 to ban all—
See, the problem is China has always confronted countries that are like much smaller than it, and it can just like bring construction work and just build shit, like who's gonna do what. They try to do the same shit with India, and with the current government and at what power scale India is, that shit is not gonna work. So India can try, China can try to flex, China can try to put soldiers there. India is gonna do the same thing but twice, right? If China puts like 100,000 troops there, India is gonna find 200,000 troops and put it there, right? India is not gonna back down because this is like key strategic point that India can't let go of. And China needs to understand you can't just like strong arm India like that. It's not some small country.
all of their soldiers from carrying firearms or explosives near the border area to reduce the chances of a major incident taking place that could cascade into a full-blown war again. So because of that ban, thousands of Chinese and Indian soldiers faced each other off high up in the mountains in 2020, armed with more primitive melee weapons instead, like spiked clubs, metal bars wrapped in barbed wire, riot gear, and machetes, which led to the combat taking place between them in 2020, appearing to be more out of the medieval era than the 21st century. Depending on the sources, the melee clash between the Indian and Chinese armies then resulted in the deaths and injuries of dozens of soldiers on both sides, representing a massive escalation along the line of actual control, since they were the first deaths caused by combat between India and China along their disputed border in more than 45 years, which led to campaigns in India to boycott Chinese products, and India's subsequent banning of hundreds of Chinese apps in the country, including TikTok and Alibaba. The crisis sharply escalated geopolitical tensions between China and India and has reverberated over the years since into the present day. And the next part of this video that covers how these border clashes went down and why they were so violent in 2020 compared to previous decades is all vital context to understanding where the dangerous India-China relationship is going in the future. But unfortunately, due to the inherently violent, controversial, and very recent nature of discussing in detail how one of the bloodiest melee battles of the 21st century happened, the next part of this video that would cover all of it would almost certainly cause the rest of the video before it to become demonetized and age restricted.
Yep, yeah. I have to pause here. I don't want this video to cause issues. But yeah, go to go.nebula.tv forces RealLifeLore and go watch video there or support there, I guess. I bet there are many videos that he can't post on YouTube. Is going to be there probably. But yeah, China has a bully mentality, right? Just bullying countries into like building shit, like who's going to do what. That's not going to work with India. China needs to learn that, right? The more aggressive China becomes, the current regime, Modi basically, is going to be more aggressive, right? He's not going to back down with shit like this. Modi has made like many decisions in past 8-10 years that are like ballsy. Even in a country like banning certain notes and things like that, that's a logistical nightmare for 1.4 billion people. If you like ban one of the most popular notes, people told him like this is gonna cause issues. You're not gonna be popular after this. He didn't care. Like, okay, this is important. This is important. And he just did that shit. So Modi takes a lot of gamble and it's like ballsy. So he's not gonna back down. He's not gonna get afraid of China. So in the recent videos, I think it was from RealLifeLore or was it Tasam Plus? I don't know. China put certain amount of soldiers in like northern, like the Himalayan border. India literally put twice as that. Like, okay, we can roll too, right? You might be powerful, but we are not that behind, right? We are top 5 as well. So, China needs to realize like you can't just strong arm everyone, right? There's a limit. Right, well, that was how geography is pushing India and China to war by channel RealLifeLore. If you like my next video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.